system. So let's start organization of the endocrine system. Endocrine gland. These are glands that secrete their hormones directly into the blood rather than through a duct. Then prostaglandins are a family of lipid compounds found in various tissues and are involved in a wide range of body responses including endocrine responses, inflammation, muscle contraction and homeostasis. The human body has two major control mechanisms, which are the nerve system and the endocrine system. Nerve system and the endocrine system. While the nerve system can control and communicate rapidly with other systems, the endocrine system controls and communicates with the help of chemical messengers and is a much slower system. And communicates with the help of chemical messengers. However, the effects of endocrine system may be more prolonged and sustained. So some important points are there. Chemical messengers. We are talking about endocrine system, so we will be concentrating on endocrine system related points. So chemical messengers, slower system, but the effects of endocrine system may be more prolonged and sustained. Okay. Then definition of a hormone. The term hormone is derived from a Greek word meaning to excite or to arouse. The term was first used by Ernest Henry Starling in 1905 in his first lecture delivered to the Royal Society. Starling, along with Bayliss, had discovered one of the first hormones called secretin in 1902. So first hormone is actually secretin. An endocrine hormone is a chemical substance that is produced by endocrine glands or a group of endocrine cells in response to certain stimuli and carried by blood to target tissues while they exert their physiological actions. Secretin is the first hormone. An endocrine hormone is a chemical substance that is produced by endocrine glands or a group of endocrine cells in response to certain stimuli and carried by blood to target tissues where they exert their physiological actions. The endocrine hormones are carried by the circulatory system to cells throughout the body. The endocrine hormones are carried by the circulatory system to the cells throughout the body, including the nerve system in some cases, where they bind with receptors and initiate many cell reactions. Some endocrine hormones affect many different types of cells of the body. For example, growth hormones from the anterior pituitary gland causes growth in most parts of the body, and thyroxine from the thyroid gland increase the rate of many chemical reactions in almost all the body cells. Then there will be some points related to coordination of body functions by chemical messengers. The multiple activities of the cells, tissues and organs of the body are coordinated by the interplay of several types of chemical messenger systems. For example, neurotransmitters are there. Neurotransmitters are released by axon terminals of neurons into the synaptic junctions and act locally to control nerve cell functions. Here we could see a local reaction. Locally they control nerve cell functions. Then endocrine hormones, which we are focusing on, are released by glands or specialized cells into the circulating blood and influence the function of target cells at another location in the cell. Then neuroendocrine hormones. Neuroendocrine hormones. Neuroendocrine hormones. Neuroendocrine hormones are secreted by neurons into the circulating blood. Neuroendocrine hormones are secreted by neurons into the circulating blood and influence the function of target cells at another location in the body. Neuroendocrine hormones are secreted by neurons into the circulating blood and influence the function of target cells at another location in the body. Then there will be some other type called paracrine hormones are secreted by cells into the extracellular fluid and affect neighboring target cells of a different type. Then autocrine hormones are there. So autocrine are secreted by cells into the extracellular fluid and affect the function of the same cells that produced them. Extracellular fluid. Then cytokines. Cytokines are peptides secreted by cells into the extracellular fluid and can function as autocrine, paracrine or endocrine hormones. So examples of cytokines include the interleukins, you might have heard about them, and other lymphokines that are secreted by helper cells and act on other cells of the immune system. They are pharmacologically important. Then cytokine hormones, for example, leptin produced by adipocytes are sometimes called adipokines. Leptin. Okay. In the next few chapters, we discuss mainly the endocrine and neuroendocrine hormone systems, keeping in mind that many of the body's chemical messenger systems interact with one another to maintain homeostasis. For example, the adrenal medullae and the pituitary gland secrete their hormones primarily in response to neural stimuli. The multiple hormone systems play a key role in regulating almost all body functions, including metabolism, growth and development, water and electrolyte balance, reproduction and behavior. For instance, without growth hormone, a person would be a dwarf. Without thyroxine and triiodothyronine from the thyroid gland, almost all the chemical reactions of the body would become sluggish and the person would become sluggish as well. Without insulin from the pancreas, the body cells could use little of the food carbohydrates for energy. Then first we are going to learn about paracrine secretions. Paracrine secretions are those chemicals that, when released, exerts its effect on cells and tissues located in the neighborhood of its site of secretion. This, by convention, includes neurotransmitters. Focus on the fact that we are not mentioning them as paracrine hormones. We are just mentioning them as paracrine secretions. So just don't get confused with neurotransmitters and endocrine system related secretions. This is a topic where we will be discussing paracrine secretions, just secretions. For example, neurotransmitters. Paracrine hormones are dispersed by simple diffusion in the interstitial fluid, and this restricts their action to short distances. Local enzymes in the vicinity usually rapidly inactivate the paracrine secretions, that preventing adequate entry into the bloodstream. So local enzymes in the vicinity usually rapidly inactivate the paracrine secretions, that preventing adequate entry into the bloodstream. So this is an important point. Local enzymes will be there in the vicinity of cells which secrete paracrine secretions. So local enzymes in the vicinity usually rapidly inactivate the paracrine secretions, thus preventing adequate entry into the bloodstream. It's going to be difficult for them to enter into bloodstream because they got inactivated with the help of local enzymes in the vicinity. Then examples of paracrine secretions include the following. Histamine released from the cells in the stomach mucosa has a direct influence on the parietal cells of the oxyntic glands, causing an increase in acid secretion. So So histamine released from the cells in the stomach mucosa had a direct influence on the parietal cells of the oxyntic glands, causing an increase in acid secretion. So they act as paracrine secretion. Which one? Histamine released from the cells of stomach mucosa, which influence the oxyntic glands which are present on the parietal cells. No, I'm sorry. The parietal cells which are located on the oxyntic glands, which will be secreting acids. Then neurotransmitters such as acetylcholine act on the parietal cells in the stomach mucosa, causing an increase in acid secretion. Neurotransmitters are there such as acetylcholine act on the parietal cells in the stomach mucosa, causing an increase in acid secretion. Then there will be prostaglandins we mentioned earlier. So PGE2 is responsible for cervical dilation at the time of childbirth. This also acts as a paracrine secretion. Histamine, neurotransmitters and prostaglandins. Here you could see a picture which depicts 3 types like autocrine, paracrine and endocrine secretions. In the first picture you could see autocrine cell which release autocrine secretion into the extracellular material or extracellular fluid, which acts on the receptors of that particular cell, on the same cell. Okay. Then why is that happening? Because we know some intracellular cascades or cyclic processes will be taking place, which only initiates when the outer receptor gets bind to the substrate. That is the only way to initiate that internal cycles or cascades. So for that purpose, the substrate or the enzyme should be released into the exterior, which need to travel through the extracellular material and this bind to that receptor on the outside. Then that receptor got activated, then all other processes of internal cascade will be taking place. So for that purpose, there must be the release of hormones into the extracellular fluid. So in case of autocrine cell, hormone or autocrine secretion is released into the extracellular fluid, which then binds with receptor of that same cell. Okay, that is happening in case of autocrine secretion. Then what is happening in case of paracrine secretion? Paracrine cell is there. We could see paracrine secretion is released into the extracellular material or fluid, which travels into a short distance and acts into the next receptor of adjacent target cell, not into the same cell's receptor but into the adjacent neighborhood cells. Okay, but that activity is prevented with the help of some enzymes which prevent the flow of this paracrine secretions into larger distances by just neutralizing them. Okay, with that mechanism they are just preventing that flow into bloodstream, flow of this paracrine secretions into bloodstream. So that is another mechanism of preventing this paracrine secretions to act to cells which are located at a larger distance. Then endocrine gland, adrenal gland is shown, and some sort of hormone is released into the vascular system in the sense into blood vessels. Then target cell at a distance. Target cell is located away from the adrenal gland, and then the result of this activation and the internal cascades will be taking place. Okay, then these are 3 methods, and I prefer to draw the figure if you are undertaking a written exam. Next is about autocrine secretions in detail. We just mentioned some important points related to paracrine secretions. For example, neurotransmitters, what happens in case of paracrine secretions, and some examples. For example, histamine, neurotransmitters and prostaglandins. Don't forget these 3. Histamine, neurotransmitters and prostaglandins, histamine, neurotransmitters, and prostaglandins. Okay. The next is about autocrine secretions. Autocrine secretions are chemicals which are secreted by specific cells into the extracellular fluid surrounding the cell and which acts upon the very cells that secrete it. Examples of autocrine secretions are as follows. Norepinephrine, that is released by neurons in the adrenal medulla, further inhibits norepinephrine release by those cells. Norepinephrine, that is released by neurons in the adrenal medulla, further inhibits norepinephrine release by those cells. Then insulin, released from beta cells in the pancreas, has an inhibitory effect on insulin secreted by these beta cells. Insulin released from beta cells in the pancreas has an inhibitory effect on insulin secreted by these beta cells, which is independent of glucose levels in the blood. So these 2 points are a bit complex, so I need to break them down into small chunks of information. Now we are learning about autocrine secretions. 2 examples are here, like norepinephrine, that is released by neurons in the adrenal medulla, further inhibits norepinephrine release by those cells. Yeah, that's a straightforward answer. I think here will be some feedback mechanisms happening, like norepinephrine is released from the neurons in the adrenal medulla, which inhibits further addition of norepinephrine into the extracellular fluid. Some sort of prevention is happening there. So autocrine secretion, an example is norepinephrine. Don't forget norepinephrine. The next example, insulin, released from the beta cells in the pancreas, has an inhibitory effect on insulin secreted by these beta cells, which is independent of glucose levels in the blood. Yeah, same is the case with norepinephrine. Then location of major endocrine organs. Now I am going to share another picture. Look at this figure. You could see some endocrine organs. Location of major endocrine organs we are going to discuss. So this figure shows the anatomical loci of major endocrine glands and endocrine tissues of the body, except for the placenta, which is an additional source of sex hormones, which is actually not shown in this figure, but you need to know that. Okay. Then different hormone systems and their important functions we will be discussing. Okay. So here you could see hypothalamus. In the figure, you could see that portion, hypothalamus. Hypothalamus produces many hormones. Many hormones. Some of them include thyrotropin releasing hormone, TRH. Thyrotropin releasing hormone, and its major function includes stimulate secretion of thyroid stimulating hormone and prolactin, and that's actually a peptide by chemical nature. That's chemical structure. When we try to learn about the chemical structure of this thyrotropin releasing hormone, we could see that it's a peptide. Okay, so that's all about this thyrotropin releasing hormone. Then corticotropin releasing hormone, CRH, that cause the release of adrenocorticotropic hormone. Okay, that's also a peptide. Then growth hormone releasing hormone, GHRH, causes release of growth hormone. That's also a peptide. Then next, growth hormone inhibitory hormone, GHIH, inhibits release of growth hormone. That's also a peptide. It is also called as somatostatin. Then gonadotropin releasing hormone, GnRH, causes the release of luteinizing hormone, LH, and follicle stimulating hormone, FSH. And this is also a peptide. So far we learned some important hypothalamus hormones. So Once again, I'm gonna quickly recap all those things. Thyrotropin releasing hormone, corticotropin releasing hormone, growth hormone releasing hormone, growth hormone inhibitory hormone, which is also called somatostatin, then gonadotropin releasing hormone. Okay. Then one more thing is that dopamine or prolactin inhibiting factor or PIF, which inhibits release of prolactin, and that thing is a amine. That's not a peptide, that's an amine. That's a peptide. Okay. Dopamine or prolactin inhibiting factor. Prolactin inhibiting factor, PIF. Okay. So that's all about the hormones secreted by hypothalamus. The next is about anterior pituitary. When we closely observe the figure I provided, you could see pituitary gland. Okay. Its location, its approximate location. Okay. So anterior pituitary is there. Which releases growth hormone, TSH, ACTH, prolactin, FSH and LH. Why I am just stating the acronyms of these terms? Because we mentioned the full name of these hormones earlier when we were learning about hypothalamus secreting hormones. Okay. So growth hormone is there, which stimulates protein synthesis and overall growth of most cells and tissues, and that one is a peptide. Then TSH. TSH in the sense thyroid stimulating hormone, TSH, which stimulates synthesis and secretion of thyroid hormones, thyroxine and triiodothyronine, and that's also a peptide. Then ACTH will be there, which stimulates synthesis and secretion of adrenocortical hormones, cortisol, androgens, and aldosterone, and that one is also a peptide. Okay. Then prolactin, which is secreted from the anterior pituitary, promotes development of female breasts and secretion of milk, and that one is also a peptide. Then FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, causes growth of follicles in the ovaries and sperm maturation in Sertoli cells of testis, and that one is also a peptide. Wait a minute, if some of you have some complications related to the full form of ACTH, I need to clarify that. Adrenocorticotropic hormone. That's it. Adrenocorticotropic hormone. Okay. Then LH will be there. It stimulates testosterone synthesis in Leydig cells of testis, stimulates ovulation, formation of corpus luteum, and estrogen and progesterone synthesis in ovaries. Okay, and that one is also a peptide. Okay, so anterior pituitary secretes many hormones. For example, growth hormone, TSH, ACTH, prolactin, FSH, and LH. Okay, then posterior pituitary. Posterior pituitary secretes two hormones, antidiuretic hormone or ADH, also called vasopressin, which increases water reabsorption by the kidneys and causes vasoconstriction and increased blood pressure. And this one is also a peptide. Okay, antidiuretic hormone ADH or vasopressin. And oxytocin is secreted from the posterior pituitary gland. And oxytocin stimulates milk ejection from breasts and uterine contractions, and that one is also a peptide. Then thyroid gland. Look at this picture. Your thyroid gland is located. Thyroid gland. Thyroid gland produce thyroxine, T4, and triiodothyronine, T3, which increases the rates of chemical reactions in most cells, thus increasing body metabolic rate, and that one is amine. Then calcitonin, next one, which is secreted from thyroid gland. Calcitonin promotes deposition of calcium in the bones and decreases extracellular fluid calcium ion concentration, and that one is also a peptide. The next Adrenal gland, look at this anatomical loci of principal endocrine glands and tissues of the body. We could see adrenal glands. Where are they? Look it. Then adrenal glands are there, and adrenal cortex secretes some hormones like cortisol. Has multiple metabolic functions for controlling metabolism of proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. Also has anti-inflammatory effects. And that one is a steroid. Okay, steroid. Then aldosterone, which increases renal sodium reabsorption, potassium secretion, and hydrogen ion secretion. And that one is an amide. Yeah, no, I'm sorry. That's also a steroid. Cortisol, aldosterone increases renal sodium reabsorption, potassium secretion, and hydrogen ion secretion. And that one is a steroid. Okay. Then adrenal medulla region will be there. So that will secrete norepinephrine and epinephrine. And they play some effects on sympathetic nerve system. So they have some effects as sympathetic stimulation, and both of these hormones are amines. Okay. Then here we could see pancreas. Where is pancreas located? Just look into this picture. Pancreas is there. So pancreas secretes insulin with the help of beta cells, and that promote glucose entry in many cells, and in this way controls carbohydrate metabolism. And this insulin is a peptide. Then glucagon, with the help of alpha cells, increases synthesis and release of glucose from the liver into the blood fluids, and this glucagon is also a peptide. So I need to slow down here because I always had this confusion of functions between this insulin and glucagon, so I need some time to learn about this. Glucagon helps in the release of glucose from the liver. Okay, so blood glucose level will be high when glucagon is there. Okay, and that one is a peptide. Then parathyroid gland, here you could see behind the thyroid gland. Just look into this figure. Behind thyroid gland, we could see parathyroid gland, which produces parathyroid hormone or PTH, which controls serum calcium ion concentration by increasing calcium absorption by the gut and kidneys and releasing calcium from bones. Okay, and this one is a peptide. Then testosterone released promotes development of male reproductive system and male secondary sexual characteristics, and this testosterone is a steroid. Then ovaries, estrogens promote growth and development of female reproductive system, female breasts, and female secondary sexual characteristics, and this estrogen is also a steroid. Then progesterone is there, which stimulates secretion of uterine milk by the uterine endometrial glands and promotes development of secretory apparatus of breasts. This uterine milk is not present in case of human, but present in some other organisms. For example, marsupials, I guess. So, and that progesterone is also a steroid. Next, placenta, human chorionic gonadotropin, HCG, which promotes growth of corpus luteum and secretion of estrogens and progesterone by corpus luteum, and that one is a peptide. Then human somatomamotropin, that probably helps promote development of some fetal tissues as well as the mother's breasts, and that one is also a peptide. Then estrogens, see actions of estrogens from ovaries, steroid. Then progesterone is also a steroid. Then kidney secrete renin, which catalyzes conversion of angiotensinogen to angiotensin 1, which acts as an enzyme, and that one is a peptide. Then 1,25 dihydroxycholecalciferol, that increases intestinal absorption of calcium and bone mineralization, and that one is also a steroid. Then heart, along with that, In case of kidney, erythropoietin is there, which increases erythrocyte production, and that is also a peptide. Then height, atrial natriuretic peptide (ANP) increases sodium excretion by kidneys, reduce blood pressure, and that is a peptide. Then stomach, produce gastrin, which is a hormone, which stimulates HCl secretion by parietal cells. And then small intestine secretin is there, which stimulates pancreatic acina cells to release bicarbonate and water, which is a peptide. Then cholecystokinin (CCK) stimulates gallbladder contraction and release of pancreatic enzymes, which is a peptide. Cholecystokinin stimulates gallbladder contraction and release of pancreatic enzymes, which is a peptide. Then adipocytes, leptin inhibits appetite, stimulates thermogenesis, peptide. That one is also a peptide. Next is about feedback control of hormone secretion, levels of control within the endocrine system. Although the plasma concentrations of many hormones fluctuate in response to various stimuli that occur throughout the day, all hormones studied thus far appear to be closely controlled. There are several control mechanisms that exist to regulate the levels of hormone very precisely. An example to review is the hypophysiotropic hormones, with a 3-level sequence to understand the different levels of hormonal control. Okay, so there are 3 levels of feedback control. Here we could see some important points related to this aspect of feedback control. So first, long loop feedback control. Like that somewhere. Long loop feedback control. Don't forget this. Okay. Long loop feedback control. In this case, the hormone secreted long loop feedback control. In this case, the hormone secreted by the peripheral endocrine gland provides a negative feedback to the hypothalamus or the anterior pituitary gland. So we just learned a new mechanism of 3 levels of feedback control. 3 levels of feedback control. First level, long loop feedback control. In this case, the hormone secreted by the peripheral endocrine gland provides a negative feedback to the hypothalamus. Negative feedback to the hypothalamus or the anterior pituitary gland. For example, excess levels of thyroxine will inhibit both the anterior pituitary gland from secreting thyroid stimulating hormone and the hypothalamus from secreting thyrotropin releasing hormone. Then short loop feedback control. Short loop feedback control. Okay, short loop feedback control. In this mechanism, the anterior pituitary hormone in plasma provides a negative feedback to the hypothalamus, decreasing the secretion of the releasing hormone. So, anterior pituitary hormone in plasma provides a negative feedback to the hypothalamus, decreasing the secretion of releasing hormone. Then ultra short loop feedback control. Ultra short loop. Ultra short loop feedback control. Long loop, short loop, ultra short loop. Okay, ultra short loop feedback control. In this mechanism, the releasing hormone themselves have a negative feedback influence on the hypothalamus, thus decreasing the secretion of the hypothalamic hormones. When we look into this figure, you could see CNS stimulus, hypothalamus, level 1 releasing hormone in plasma. Then anterior pituitary gland, level 2 anterior pituitary hormone in plasma, peripheral endocrine gland, level 3 peripheral endocrine hormone in plasma, target tissue for level 3 hormones. Once again, CNS stimulus, hypothalamus, level 1 releasing hormone in plasma, anterior pituitary gland, level 2 anterior pituitary hormone in plasma, peripheral endocrine gland, peripheral endocrine hormone in plasma, then target tissue for level 3 hormones. The next, negative feedback prevents overactivity of hormone systems. Yeah, that's obvious. Then in most instances, hormonal control is exerted through negative feedback mechanisms that ensure a proper level of hormone activity at the target tissue. After a stimulus causes release of hormone, conditions or products resulting from the action of the hormone tend to suppress its further release. In other words, the hormone or one of its products has a negative feedback effect to prevent oversecretion of the hormone or overactivity of the target tissue. So, after a stimulus causes release of the hormone, conditions or products resulting from the action of the hormone tend to suppress its further release. In other words, the hormone or one of its products has a negative feedback effect to prevent oversecretion of the hormone or overactivity at the target tissue. The controlled variable is sometimes not the secretory rate of the hormone but the degree of activity of the target tissue. Therefore, only when the target tissue activity rises to an appropriate level will feedback signals to the endocrine gland become powerful enough to slow further secretion of the hormone. Feedback regulation of hormone can occur at all levels, including gene transcription and translation steps involved in the synthesis of hormones and steps involved in processing hormones or releasing stored hormones. Examples of negative feedback mechanisms: negative feedback by plasma levels of thyroid hormones on the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary gland. Negative feedback by plasma levels of thyroid hormones. Negative levels of plasma levels of thyroid hormones on the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary gland. Negative feedback by plasma cortisol levels on the hypothalamus and anterior pituitary gland. Then, when we try to learn about the example of a negative feedback inhibition, we could see this picture. Yeah, this one. Here we could see hypothalamus, thyrotropin releasing hormone, anterior pituitary gland, thyroid stimulatory hormone, thyroid gland, triiodothyronin, thyroxine in plasma, target tissue. And then this triiodothyronin or thyroxine in plasma influence the anterior pituitary gland, and there might be some negative influences or some inhibition will be taking place. Okay, T3 and T4 in plasma will influence anterior pituitary gland. Same is the case happening with hypothalamus. T3 and T4 in plasma influence hypothalamus, which again, act as a loop which prevents further activation of this thyrotropin releasing hormone. Okay. Then surges of hormone can occur with positive feedback. In a few instances, positive feedback occurs when the biological action of the hormone causes additional secretion of the hormone. An example of positive feedback is the surge of luteinizing hormone that occurs as a result of the stimulatory effect of estrogen on the anterior pituitary before ovulation. The secreted LH then acts on the ovaries to stimulate additional secretion of estrogen, which in turn causes more secretion of LH. Eventually, LH reaches an appropriate concentration and a typical negative feedback control of hormone secretion is then exerted. Clinical conditions associated with hormone release, that means clinical variations occur in hormone release. Superimposed on the negative and positive feedback control of hormone secretion are periodic variations in hormone release that are influenced by seasonal changes, various stages of development and aging, and diurnal or daily cycle and sleep. For example, secretion of growth hormone is markedly increased during the early period of sleep but is reduced during the later stages of sleep. In many cases, these cyclical variations in hormone secretion are due to changes in activity of neural pathways involved in controlling hormone release. Then, clinical conditions associated with altered hormone release. Various clinical conditions can manifest if the secretion of hormones is altered, either due to hyposecretion or hypersecretion. For example, anterior pituitary gland, endocrine gland, growth hormone, pituitary dwarfism, gigantism in children. Gigantism is an indication of hypersecretion. Okay, then all hormones of this anterior pituitary gland, panhypopituitarism, which creates acromegaly in adults. Panhypopituitarism is a clinical condition of hyposecretion. Then posterior pituitary gland, antidiuretic hormone, which when secreted low create diabetes insipidus, and when secreted at high amount creates Graves' disease. Then parathyroid gland create some problems will be there. So cretinism in children and myxedema in adults. Then parathyroid gland, hypoparathyroidism, hyperparathyroidism. Then pancreas, insulin, type 1 diabetes mellitus, hyperinsulinism. Then type 2 diabetes mellitus. Then adrenal gland, glucocorticoid, mineralocorticoids and glucocorticoids, epinephrine and norepinephrine, Addison's disease and Cushing syndrome and pheochromocytoma. These are some examples.